Welcome to Behind the Beauty, the official North Texas Plastic Surgery podcast. We are on season 1, episode 6, neuromodulators, which is a very fancy term for something probably you know best as Botox. And we'll get into some of the other competitors to Botox, but basically the whole category of neuromodulators. I'm joined today by the lovely Onna Feister. Nice to have you, Onna.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Onna is our nurse injector at our Southlake office. So if you've ever wandered around the Southlake town square and tried to figure out why all of the moms you see walking around look so young and so beautiful, more often than not, it's because of this young lady right here, Onna Feister. So I'll go ahead and do some humble bragging for you, Onna. Onna has 14 years of injecting experience. Onna has worked for the past 7 years here at North Texas Plastic Surgery.
Correct.
And before that, for a couple of other plastic surgeons in El Paso. Is that right?
Correct.
Onna is a nurse practitioner by training. And beyond all of her years of injectable experience, both with Botox, Restylane, Juvederm, etc., she's actually has her own business where she trains other injectors, including other nurse injectors, other nurse practitioners, and other physicians and surgeons. Is that right?
Correct.
And Onna is also one of the lead trainers for Allergan. Again, for those of you who are in the lay field listening to our podcast, Allergan is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that actually are the owners and makers of Botox and Juvederm, probably two of the biggest injectable products out there, and they have Onna doing the training for them. So Onna, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I cut your bio short. What else did I leave out?
I think that's the meaty ingredient of my experience and what I do. I've been injecting for 14 years, going into 15.
Okay.
I teaching for Allergan for the last almost 5, going into 5. Allergan, as you were mentioning, is the manufacturer of Botox and Juvederm. I do train privately as well in other brands like Galderma and other brands. But today we're going to talk about neuromodulators. So neuromodulators, like you were mentioning, right? That's the medication classification, right, of the drug or the medication that we use to kind of like control the muscle contraction. There's 5 in the market. We have Botox, which came into the market in 2002 and was the first one that got approved by the FDA, and that's why we hear more about it. We have Dysport that came in 2009 and manufactured by Galderma. We have Xeomin that it's manufactured by Merz. We have Jeuveau that it's manufactured by I was looking at it a second ago.
There's going to be a test on this later.
And
That's
then,
all right. We'll go.
And then the latest that we got into the market, which is Daxify by Revance. Okay. And that's the newer neuromodulator. It's claiming that it lasts longer. So we're very excited. We just brought it into the practice and we're trying it.
So if I could just kind of pause for a second here. And I know we have a lot of listeners who have never ventured into neuromodulators or Botox. And I want to emphasize today's episode is not sponsored by Allergan. So you will hear a objective review of the different types of neuromodulators and not just Botox. We will use the name Botox, though, quite a bit because, quite frankly, they've become synonymous with the medication classification. Very similarly, when you go to the store, people talk about buying a Kleenex. Kleenex is actually a brand. It's actually tissue paper is actually what you're purchasing if you buy a knockoff brand or et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about Botox or neuromodulators. why do I want to neuromodulate? What the heck does that mean? And why in the heck would I ever want to do that to myself?
So our neuromodulator, what it's doing, it's kind of like, or how I explain it to my patients is, it's kind of like blocking the signal in between the nerve and the muscle. And that's why the muscle doesn't contract as much. And we can go into the...
And why would I want my muscle not to contract?
Well, because it's going to...
I mean, I go to the gym a lot. I want it to contract, right?
So
what's different about this?
In the upper face, which is the areas that are approved for Botox use, and I'm talking about the brand Botox. Botox is the only one that has the approval for the 3 areas on the face, which is glabella, your angry look, or in between your brows, your forehead, so we don't see those horizontal lines, and the crow's feet. So those are the 3 areas that are approved for Botox. The other neuromodulators are only approved for glabella. It doesn't mean that we don't do it off-label in the other areas, but it's important for the public to know that Botox is the only one that has the approval for the 3 areas. So what it's doing is blocking the signal in between the nerve and the muscle. By blocking the signal, the muscle is not contracting as much. So it's preventing, right, the kind of like getting that wrinkle creased into the skin because of that repetitive movement.
Right. So when we think of muscle, right, everyone thinks of the big muscles of the body, you know, the biceps, in my case, the triceps, sorry, couldn't resist, etc. But when we talk about, and those muscles are responsible for obviously motion as they contract. But when we talk about the face, there are certain muscles that obviously move the face that unfortunately create some negative side effects. So when we raise our brows, that's great because we look surprised or furrow our brows and we're angry. The problem is that for many of us, I can tell you I have 6 children, so unfortunately I'm very animated in my face. The more I furrow my brow at them, the more I start to form a crease here, which forms a wrinkle.
Yeah. And obviously the skin is changing as well, right, with age. So the skin is getting thinner. And then that repetitive movement, it kind of like creates that wrinkle or that crease. So what I tell my patients is Botox or any of the neuromodulators in this case, it's 100% prevention. So you really want to start doing it before the lines get set into the skin because that's the best way that you're going to prevent them. So you can get to 80 without any lines if you keep doing your Botox.
Right. That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, there is really no reason why I want to walk around like this. I mean, this is not a good looking face for any purpose, right?
Yeah,
and this wrinkle right here in between my brows is actually what Botox was first came on the market or invented for. Is that right?
Yes. It was the first area to be approved. It was actually discovered, they were using it for strabismus, which is that involuntary movement of the eye. And they started seeing the patients coming back with beautiful skin and no wrinkles. So they started doing the testing for the aesthetic portion of it. And of course, it's been a hit since.
And of course, one of the things that people always or lay people always ask me about is Botox, is that like botulism? And what's the relationship between the two? Obviously, the names are very similar. You want to fill us in on that?
So it is the same toxin, right?
It is the same toxin.
It is.
Okay.
Obviously, we use it in a very controlled setting, right? We know exactly how it works. We know exactly where we're putting it and the dosing that it works. Botox has been in the market for over 20 years. We just got the 20-year anniversary last year. So it's very safe. It is a tiny amount.
It's not going to give me botulism.
No. We know how it works. We know that it stays very localized in the area where we treat it. So it is super safe. We've been using it for over 20 years. I really like, and this is Botox brand. It has over 4,500 research studies in the market. So it's one of the neuromodulators that has been
4,500 studies behind it. And it's one of the neuromodulators that has been studied the most. We know how it works. We know it's safe when it's done right? So that's why it's so important to get the right training, right? Right. Okay. So I'm not going to get botulism from my Botox. That's the first thing, right? So, so I'm safe there.
Yeah.
Now, the other big thing that I hear from patients is, am I going to look frozen.
Yeah.
Or like
different.
I can't move my face. I can't make any expression. I'm going to look weird or odd. Talk to me about that. What do you?
So the ideal, right? And I think that varies by injector, but the ideal, or at least for my patients, I like the more natural look. We have doses, right, that we have to kind of like abide from the studies that Allergan has done on Botox, and those doses are 20 units on the glabella, 20 units on the forehead, and 24 units on the eyes. So if we stay within those doses, it should be a natural looking result. Obviously, not all patients are going to need the same dose, right? Like in my experience, I see males needing a little bit more units than females. That's very normal. And I think it has to do a lot with what are the expectations of the patient. Some patients like to be frozen, right? And that's completely personal. And if they like it that way, we can do it that way. But normally with the doses that are indicated, we see a very natural result. And it does have to do a lot with where we place that product.
And I think that's critical. I think a couple of things you said there that I really like. Number one, that you can really dial it in.
Yes.
So we can give you as much or as little motion as you request.
Correct.
Okay.
And not as the patient request, because we have seen with all those studies that are in the market, right? We have seen and we know for a fact that dose equals duration. So we don't want to do a very light dose either, because then the product starts fading quicker.
Well, okay, so maybe I misspoke. Maybe not dose, but location of the injection.
Definitely.
So
it can look more natural or more frozen, right? Depending on what the patient is looking for.
And I think one thing that is important for our listeners to understand who are anxious about getting into the neuromodulator world, is that when we talk about frozen, we're talking about minimizing the movement of the brows specifically. So even when we have patients that we're being very aggressive with neuromodulators on, they still have all of the same facial expressions as you or I. Yeah. It's just that this area specifically here has little to no motion. And the reason why that's so important is that is really the area that wrinkles the worst, wrinkles the fastest, and in my humble opinion, is the surest sign of age.
I agree. I tell my, and again, talking about the dosing and the natural results, I always tell my patients, whenever they come in for the first time for a consult, right, and they're like, they have never done anything, I always recommend them to start with Botox or a neuromodulator, right, in this case. I feel is like the easiest way to start. There's really no attachments, because we know that after the 3 months, the product is going to fade and you're going to go back to baseline, right? So there's really no attachments to it. And it's natural, it's subtle when it's done right. And it's not that expensive, right? It's one of the non-super expensive treatments. So I think it's a great way for patients to kind of like get their feet wet into these type of procedures.
And I love that you said that, because we had an episode just a few weeks ago that we filmed where we talked about patients really struggling with, hey, I know that I'm starting to hit my 30s, maybe early 40s, and I know I need to do something, but I'm not quite sure what. And when we talk about the non-surgical aesthetic world, I agree with you 100%. Really, the entry point is Botox. That is the biggest thing, and I think the best thing that you can do from a non-surgical side to start looking a little bit younger. And I think you should start it as early as you can to prevent the wrinkles from setting in.
Correct.
And then once you've done that and you feel comfortable with that, then we can start building to more things like fillers and laser resurfacing and things like that. But really, I think for 95% of the patients or more out there, if you said, give me one thing, one entry point into the non-surgical aesthetic world, Botox is it.
I agree. That's one of the first things that I normally recommend. And we have to understand that, let's say 28-year-old or 30-year-old is in the office, right? They may not have wrinkles, right?
Right.
There's benefits of doing Botox even before those lines set in. Obviously, the prevention portion of it, right, which is the main thing. But we can also play with the brow placement, right? We can give a little bit of a brow lift. When we treat the crow's feet, it does elevate a little bit of the corner of the brow as well. And it makes your eyes look kind of like bigger and brighter. So it even if you don't have the lines set into the skin, which is really what we are trying to avoid, Botox is a great treatment.
One other thing that I think was important that you mentioned was you said it's one of the more inexpensive things that we do as well. And so not only is it a great entry point, but it is very cost effective.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we talk about the cost just a little bit, because one of the pitfalls that I see amongst patients is, or one of the complaints is, hey, I went up the street to sort of, med spa in the mall.
Yeah.
And I didn't get much effect. Botox didn't work for me. When you hear patients tell you that, what's usually behind that?
So it could be many things, right? We have like regulations, right? When it comes to Botox and when it comes to how to reconstitute the vial and how many units to use.
There you go. So that's the big word, reconstitution.
Exactly.
So for those of you that don't know what that means.
So Botox comes dry, right? In a vial. So
like a powder.
Exactly. It's actually like a little smear on the bottom of the vial. It's not a powder form. So we have to reconstitute the product, right? And obviously we have doses, right, or amounts of normal saline or bacteriostatic normal saline that we use,
salt water,
to reconstitute the product. So, and we know that if you put more fluid into that vial, that the one that it's indicated, which is 2.5 mLs per 100 unit vials, we know that the product is going to disperse more, so you can droop somebody easier. And that's why I always teach on don't put any more fluid than what it's indicated. Because all the studies, those 4,500 studies that we have been talking about, they have been done in the 2.5 reconstitution rate.
But if I was running a sort of mall-based med spa or strip mall-based med spa, I could make a little bit more money if I put a little more salt water in there and a little less medicine, is what you're telling me.
And that's why we see like drooping cases, right? Because you really don't know how much that product is dispersing each injection that you're doing. And obviously it's not going to last you as long, right? Because it's kind of like diluted at that point. So yeah, that's why it's so important to go to a reputable place where you know that they're not going to be playing with the doses or that reconstitution, and somebody obviously that knows what they're doing, right? Which is
so don't price shop your Botox.
Yeah, it's
Trust
your face.
Me.
It's your face.
One, it's your face. Two, you don't know how it's being diluted and reconstituted. Excuse me. Thank you. But the reality is that part of the reason why you may be getting such a deal on your Botox is that they're giving you very little actual Botox and a lot of salt water.
When I see those like prices at $9 per unit, I'm like, what are they doing there? That's definitely not a price that you can like.
Right.
It's too
sustainable.
It's exactly.
So you're getting a bunch of salt water.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the other key points is where you inject it. And that's where the artistry really comes. Yeah. And I got to tell you, Onna is a true artist with this. So for those of you who know me well, one of my sort of humbling moments in my career, and I've had many of them, was that my beautiful wife, the lovely Dr. Deborah Obaid, I used to do her Botox for the first 8 years of my practice or so, until I met Onna. And, you know, I had hired Onna to start working in the practice, and Deborah one day made an appointment without telling me to go see Onna. She came home that night and told me, she is so much more gentle than you. It's ridiculous. You should really have her teach you what she's doing. And of course, the Botox actually looked a lot better as well. Yeah. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I also have to thank you because I haven't had to inject her since.
Yeah.
Because I think you've done it for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
But sorry, I cut you off. I think what's really important there, though, is that the artistry of the person with the needle makes a big difference too. So it's not just you know, the amount of actual product that you're receiving, but it's the placement of the product.
Exactly. It's not the product, is who's holding the product in their hands.
Yes.
Regardless if it's filler or Botox. I agree. It's like an art. It's something that I enjoy doing, and it's something that obviously I've learned over the years to kind of like make it better. I'm not gonna say I'm perfect. I did some boo-boos in the beginning, right? So I try to teach those boo-boos, to whenever I'm teaching, so hopefully they can avoid them. And the companies as well. I feel like when I started, there was like no education for us as an injector, and now I feel like the companies are kind of like just like so eager to kind of like train their injectors properly, and that's where we came as
well. At the end of the day, I love that you do the education with it, because what we want is people having good experience with neuromodulators out there. Of course, we'd love you to have that with us, but we'd love you to have it wherever you go.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, we know that even if you see someone else for your neuromodulator, but you have a good experience, then you're going to have great things to say about neuromodulators. And all of us in the aesthetic field are going to be better off
from it. Definitely. So I agree. And one of the things that it's so important too is, again, the placement and the artistry, of it. It's for patients to look natural. I feel that's the first thing that patients will ask whenever they are in the chair, is it going to be super noticeable? I want it to be super natural. And I think in general, injectors should be kind of like more going towards the more natural results, because again, if we see scary people in the street, and then that's why patients sometimes they're kind of like holding back from trying it, because they see scary people in the street. So, and somebody injected that scary people that it's walking there. So I think it's a responsibility of all injectors to kind of like maybe give a little step back and just inject in a very natural, kind of like subtle way.
Yeah, there is definitely you definitely want to look at the injector and her work or his work that you are seeing to make sure that you like the way their patients look. And that's one thing I can tell you. I look at your work every night when I go home with my beautiful wife. And
well, she's gorgeous.
Yes, but that always helps, right? But aside, I should confess, Onna also does my injections as well, but not nearly the pretty canvas that she is. But I think it's important though that I would say that if you feel like you've had a bad Botox experience and you feel like you're someone who Botox doesn't work for, doesn't last very long for, etc., I think it's important that you really investigate who you saw and really consider seeing an expert like Onna, who trains not just on it, but trains other people how to do it, to make sure that you're getting the right dosage in the right location, to make sure you're getting the effect.
Exactly.
So we spent a whole bunch of time talking about Botox. I think one thing that our listeners would love to know about is what of the other products that are out there. And so I think you kind of went through a great list of them, and I'm going to kind of just ask you about some of the benefits or downsides to some of the competitors. Obviously, Botox is the Kleenex of neuromodulators. It is the first to market. It is the largest market share still, 21 years on. But tell me, I think one of the other big competitors, Dysport, depending upon how you say it. What do you think about Dysport? Advantages, disadvantages versus Botox?
I think I honestly, whenever patients are sitting in my chair, they're both great. They're both great products. We hear more about Botox because it's the clinics, right? Of the brand. But Dysport is great. I have no complaints. I use a lot of Dysport in during my day as well. So Dysport is manufactured by Galderma. Galderma claims that Dysport kicks in a little bit sooner and then it lasts a little bit longer. With my patients, and even when I have tried
I've not seen it last longer personally.
I haven't seen longer duration, honestly, but I do have a couple of patients that tell me that it does kick in sooner for them. So if the patient prefers Dysport,
so Botox, Allergan sort of markets it as kicking in at 3 to 5 days post injection, whereas Dysport, Galderma at 2 to 3 days.
2 to 3 days. So it's a very slight difference. But again, some patients prefer it because they say that it does kick in sooner for them. But they're both great neuromodulators. They're a little bit different molecularly.
Talk about the handling of it. Right,
exactly.
So tell me about that.
So molecularly, they're a little bit different. For example, Botox comes in a 100-unit vial when Dysport comes in a 300-unit vial.
Yes.
So the amount of units that we inject is different, right? Because it's a different medication. It doesn't mean that you need more units of Dysport for it to work because it's weaker. It doesn't mean anything like that. It's just like getting a prescription of amoxicillin for 500 or azithromycin for 250. It's just a completely different medication. So again, Dysport is indicated by the FDA for glabella, for 50 units. Again, every patient is different. Some majority of the male patients require the 50 units, right? Some females, maybe I will do 40 on their glabella, and they do great with that. They're both great products. I use them equally. Whenever patients ask me, sometimes I even have them try one, and then their next treatment I will try the other, so they can kind of like decide which one they like the most, because they're great products.
Now, I don't know if you've seen this. When I was injecting, one of the things that I noticed with Dysport was that there was a little tendency for Dysport to spread a little bit more than Botox, and so there's advantages and disadvantages to that for the patients, right? So if you have never had a neuromodulator injected, the way that we do it is we basically inject it with a series of very, very tiny, smaller than a insulin needle poke around the forehead to inject the medicine. What we found is that, or what I've found personally, is that the Dysport tends to spread a little bit more, which some patients like because they say, oh, that gives a little bit more even result than the Botox. But then there's a downside to it, which is when it spreads a little bit more, it can sometimes spread to areas where we don't want it. And specifically when we talk about the brows, if it spreads to an area we don't want it, instead of elevating our brows, we can actually have them go down. Nobody wants that because it's like you're frowning all the time. And so advantages, disadvantages there.
Yeah, but honestly, that can happen with any neuromodulator. I think we go back to placement, right? Where we place that product, how we reconstitute that product, right? Because it's supposed to spread or disperse 1 centimeter around each injection. So I haven't personally had any issues with anything like that. I do see the patients that like to be a little bit more frozen, the ones that like the least amount of movement, sometimes they will prefer Dysport.
Okay.
So, and again, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes like and sometimes
some people like Coke, some people like Pepsi.
Exactly.
Plain and simple.
That's a good
and
way
most
of
people
putting
can't
it.
tell the difference.
That's a good way to put it. And that's exactly what I tell my patients. If I didn't mention it, you wouldn't even know what I'm injecting, because it's injected exactly the same. We're at the end of the day, we're treating the same muscles, right? The price, at least in our practice, right, it kind of like evens out. Because
it ends
obviously,
up being just about the same.
Exactly. So it's about the same price. So they're both great products. Okay.
Yep.
I couldn't remember the name of the Juvo. It's Evolus. Evolus is the manufacturer.
All right, so let's talk about Juvo since you brought it up.
So
tell me about Juvo. What's the difference between that?
So before going into Juvo, let's talk about Xeomin, because Xeomin is one of the older ones. I think Xeomin was approved in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. And it's by Merz. It's another brand of neuromodulators. It comes in a 100-unit vial, just like Botox.
And I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. For those of you that are looking these products up, Xeomin, for some reason, is spelled Xeomin. So sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. Xeomin with an X.
Yes.
And so Xeomin is just the Merz kind of like brand. It's a good product. I honestly feel like it doesn't last as long. So we don't carry it. Then Juvo, it's the Juvo got approved, I think in 2017. It was a little bit before COVID, 17 or 18.
Yeah.
Again, manufactured by Evolus. It's a good neuromodulator, same as Xeomin. I feel like it doesn't last as long.
Yeah.
It's great for maybe your younger population, maybe your late 20s, right? If they want to try something, but I feel like it doesn't last as long. And then the newer one.
So I think if we look at market share, right? Right now, Botox obviously number one, and then second would be Dysport, and then third would be Xeomin, fourth would be Juvo. And then now there's the new. Now what's new? And as of the date of shooting this episode, I think we've had the good fortune of being one of the first practices in the area to get it. We've only had it in our hands for a few weeks. Is Daxify. So take it away, Onna. Tell me about Daxify.
Yeah, Daxify got approved, I think, in beginning of this year. And it is the newer neuromodulator in the market. Daxify is claiming that to last almost twice as your regular neuromodulator.
So the big study that they used with the FDA to get approved was showing that Daxify was essentially in full effect for 24 weeks, which is 6 months, as opposed to Botox, which tends to last 3 to 4 months. And so basically twice as long as Botox.
Exactly. And that's what they're claiming, right? And like you said, it's been just a couple of weeks that we have been trying it. So far, so good, right?
So neither of us can sit here in front of you and tell you that our patients have had it in for 6 months without moving.
Exactly.
We just know that that's what the FDA studies showed.
Exactly.
So we're excited about it.
To try it. And obviously, price is a little bit different, right? Because it's supposed to last longer. But we are very excited.
I can't speak for our listeners, but for me, I'd pay twice as much.
Yeah, if
it lasted twice as long, right?
And I mean, people are busy, right? They don't want to be in the office, even if Botox takes maybe it's like a 20-minute treatment. It's something quick. The fact that they have to schedule their appointment and they have to come in. So I'm excited. If it's going to be lasting longer, I think it's going to be a great product for patients, especially those busy patients that cannot come in every 3 months.
We've talked about a lot of the roadblocks that people put up when I talk to Botox about them. A lot of them say, I just can't make it into the office every 3 to 4 months. I got too much going on in my life. This is a great alternative because it's going to last 6, right? And then they said that in the studies, it was actually 28 weeks until your muscles return back to sort of normal function. So even though there's full effect for 24 weeks and then 28 weeks, which is, getting close to 7 months before you're back to baseline.
So we are excited, just like biting our nails, waiting to see how well it works. And we have treated like probably around 10 patients already, and just like paying attention on their results and duration for sure.
And just so that our listeners know how excited we are about it, I can tell you that a couple of the 10 that you've already started with are, again, my lovely bride and some of our closest friends, because we're really, really excited about what's to come with Daxify.
Yeah. Looking forward to see how well it works, for sure.
Well, I know that we can keep this conversation going for another half an hour, but I know our listeners have a lot to get to. Thank you, Onna, so much for taking time out of your busy injection schedule to kind of go over the basics of neuromodulators. If you want more information, definitely visit our website, NorthTexasPlasticSurgery.com, or check out Onna's Instagram,
Injector Onna.
And Onna is spelled ONNA, at Injector Onna, to learn all about it. And you can definitely shoot us a line on our website and our contact forms, where you can also DM Onna to help get an appointment set up. Or if you're interested, or if you're an injector interested in learning more about training, you can also DM Onna to find out about that. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.